Well, good afternoon, everybody. We are here to talk to a number of experts in the area of dealing with events, dealing with safety, dealing with crowded space. Now is a particularly important time. You will probably know there's been a number of incidents which have been in the news. This title is Putting an Event on During COVID and looking at the regulations, guidance surrounding putting on events during COVID, and very importantly, the factors that impact crowded space today in that post-COVID world. We have some experts, international experts here, who I'll introduce very quickly. Professor Chris Kemp, authority in crowded space, been involved in that for 35 years. We have Peter Dalton, who's CEO of PAD, Command Consultancy, involved in international protective security consultancy for quite a considerable time too. Pascal Viot, head of Department Safety, Security and Services, and again, active in the event safety management since I believe 1992. Can you believe it? He doesn't look that old. And we also have Tim Owen, dealing with city management, events overlay assurance, major city events. So we have some very important people. Make sure I haven't missed anyone. Have I missed anyone? I don't think I've missed anyone. Have I missed anyone? No. So with that, I would like us to, Pete Dalton, I realized, no, not Pete Dalton. Did I mention Pete?
Yes, you did. Thank you. Very kind.
Good. I apologize. You're so good. I mentioned you twice. There are a number of questions that we're going to go through in the next 20 minutes. And then we're going to go through a series of questions from other people. And hopefully we'll get some great ideas. So the questions that I want to put to people, first of all, are thinking about how has risk been affected by the advent of COVID, and how has this changed event security and safety? So I'd quite like to put this question to everyone. Perhaps I'll start with Pete and then go into Chris.
Yeah, no, fine. Thank you very much. First thing I would say is it's really important to recognize in terms of events or crowded space management that your risk management process is really important. And COVID or biosafety or security risk should feature along with your other risk assessment processes. And by that, I mean the existing key threats and hazards. So the old threats and hazards such as crime, disorder, crowd management, bad weather, loss of structure haven't gone away. And what we tend to see, there can be an issue where authorities or planners lock on to a new specific novel risk or a novel hazard. So one of the things that we've been seeing around the world actually is people are locking into, quite rightly to some extent, COVID-19 management mitigation and planning to the, if you like, the detriment of other existing threats and hazards. So really important that your process is joined up, it's integrated across all agencies, and you take an all threats and all hazards approach. If you don't, you will lead to a disconnect and a breakdown between the safety, security and service aspects. Quite right to focus attention on COVID. It's a serious risk, but it has to feature amongst the rest of our processes too.
Thank you very much. Chris, I wonder if you noticed equally issues that have come as a result of COVID?
Yeah, I think it's quite a multifaceted issue, because this is really about risk appetite as well. Because what you see is different events have different risk appetites from the number of people, the number of stakeholders who are involved in them. So if you take, for instance, something like Silverstone, then what you have there is you have people in family groups. We had 140,000 people at this event over the summer each day. And as people come in, because you had to show your COVID passport, or you had to have some form of identification that showed that you'd had a test, the kind of risk appetite that people had was lowered. So people were more, eager to go into these elements. If you take football, did a lot of work at Wembley recently. And what you have there is you have something that will never change. And that's the appetite for risk of many football supporters who are there. Whatever happens, their activity will be the same, whatever they do. And it makes it quite difficult for a lot of people. If you come into theatre events, then they've got quite an appetite, which again depends on the genre. It depends on kind of type of people that are there. So the age group especially. So the older people are the more kind of risk averse they seem to be. And younger people tend to be less risk averse and go to more of these events. And also when you come to festivals as well. So, but that's just looking at it from one side. That's looking at it from the side of the participants. If you look at it from other sides, such as the stakeholders, then we've had a huge brain drain during COVID where people have actually left the industry. So 250,000 people have left the industry in various sectors of it. And one of those areas is at the bottom end where you kind of get people coming in to do stewarding and all that kind of activity, whereby people have found that it's much better paid to work in something like a warehouse or to work as a delivery driver, and you don't have to work nights and you don't have to do various other activities. So that lack of people, and those from the top who've actually gone as well, through the various deliveries of, where people have not had jobs anymore, where they're unable to have that job because it no longer exists during that period because some companies couldn't afford to keep people on, etc. So those people have gone and they've gone into other sectors which are better paid. And so there's a drain of that intelligence and information as that comes through, which I think is really important. And we should be looking at that because people's appetites then who are coming into the industry are very different from those that were already there, because you're working with new stewarding companies, you're working with new partners, you're working supervisors, are working with a new team. This kind of thing changes the appetite for risk that you have. So I think that risk appetite element is a really important part.
Thanks, Chris. I like the fact you talked about a brain drain as well, because I haven't introduced myself. I'm Dr. Barton Robertson. I'm the program leader for a program which we'll mention a little while, which is very much related to this subject. And you can see behind Pete, MSc Crowded Space Design, and also looking at design management and risk analysis. So thank you very much for that, Pete. So thank you, Chris, for talking about obviously the appetite, but also the brain drain. I wonder if, I don't want to stay too long in this question, but perhaps if I could move on to Pascal, if you could just tell me a little bit, again, to the answer to that question, how is risk affected, how has it been affected rather by the advent of COVID?
Sure. Thank you. Hello, Martin. Actually, we can say that the COVID crisis has been a very good revelator, a revealer of the weaknesses and of our industry. What did we heard about our industry? First, events and crowded spaces are dangerous. Secondly, the risk management capabilities of the event organizers are low. And thirdly, the attendees will not comply prevention rules. That's more or less what we heard about us. And that's a pity, because I clearly believe that we can reach the goal. We can promote the knowledges available on crowd safety, especially crowd safety management, like queuing systems, like safety by design to manage the density, information given to the attendees. I think we will go further on this point later on. Actually, we as professionals are probably the best to transfer and translate the risk into practical strategies on the ground. And it's probably not only about medical risk. It's about crowd risk management, and we are used to that, and probably we could be more confident and able to convince the authorities that we are able to do it by training the staff, by having a service-oriented mission, by engaging the people from both sides. I think, for example, security agents and spectators are in the same boat, working for the same goal, which is to provide a good and safe experience. So, yeah, I think the crisis has revealed something from us, and we need to capitalize on this point and trying to do better in the future.
Okay. I realise that we've talked quite a lot about this subject. I nonetheless will just ask Tim. Tim Owen, would you like to say anything, unfortunately just briefly, and then we'll move on to another question?
I think we'll come on to issues of people behaviour and how you persuade people to change their behaviour. So I'll leave my comments for the next session, but
Okay.
it is about what people want to do, and as Chris and others have said, appetite for risk.
And Pascal, you talked a bit there about obviously space, and the urban space is obviously a key area for managing pre-event practice. Have you then and your teams observed any changes in the sofa to sofa experience, i.e. from home to the event for fans since COVID has merged? Have you seen differences?
Yeah, I think it's not only about differences, just like if a crisis changed everything. I think it's, as I said, revealing some point, and the most important lesson learned for me with the COVID situation is that the customer journey approach in event safety is key. We have to consider the whole experience of an attendee, starting from sofa to sofa. And during this sofa to sofa process, people attending an event will be transformed. If you look at, Chris was talking about the sport context, football match, for example, people from home to the stadium will be transformed into spectators, into supporters. So they will maybe wear a scarf or a football jersey, and they will condition in a way to become spectators and supporters. And we need to take them along this process. We know that we need to provide right information at the right moment in this process. And maybe we have to stop considering that the experience of an attendee starts at the doors of an event. We need to provide information. We need to combine the self-oriented behavior of the people with information provided, with maybe new rules and new way to behave in this experience. So that's really key. And in addition, I would say, talking about urban space, we are still very uncomfortable to think about what's going on, as I said, in front of the door or in the public space all around an event area. And that was the same question if you look at the situation after 2015, after the terrorists attacked and the increase of the level of the terrorism risk. Who owns this area in between public space and event site? Who is in charge of that? And we are very used to talk together about interoperability between event organizers and authorities, for example, like police forces. We need to go this way. Actually, we need to learn some lessons, but also, as I said, to capitalize on what was already there. And this issue was already there, by the way, and it's still the same with COVID. The meaning of that is to say we probably need a global risk management approach for events, taking space and time into account more strongly. That would be my point, Martin.
Pascal, thank you very much indeed. And I think that the point about the space being a live space and the fact that experience is so very, very important to our fans, to our audience, and an awareness of that transformational capacity of experience is so important, and ensuring that it's safe. Thank you very much indeed. So transformation and thinking about how we use spaces perhaps in different ways is certainly an important aspect of safety generally, but of course in terms of how we use spaces for audiences, for crowds, etc. Now, I wonder if we can maybe move into a slightly different part of questioning and think slightly differently, but think about learning from our mistakes. We have to learn from our mistakes, of course, but learning from mistakes provides the biggest difficulty, though, for basically safer events. Why is this such a challenge? Why do we have such problems with that? And I wonder if I could maybe put that question to Pete. Pete, can you tell me a little bit why? Why is it such a challenge?
I think we see time and time again any number of crowded space case studies, and I guess most of us on the panel today would remember Hillsborough and the seminal learning from that. But if you apply any significant crowded space issue, and there are so many from any country we can pick on or digest, there are commonalities. Normally, the cause of the issue, whatever it may be, is normally a cumulative total of a number of decisions, processes, and policies. It's not normally just one incident that causes the issue. And I think the findings of Travis Scott a few weeks ago will be interesting to see that. But I think there's probably a few reasons. One is cost and finances. So do people spend the time as part of their event cycle doing due diligence, looking at their planning and preparation, looking at previous operations, going through quality assurance, testing and exercises? That's one issue. A second one, which we see, is, I guess, to do with commercial sensitivities. So if one party is running an event and may want to compare and contrast to other events from previous suppliers or contractors, not everyone wants to share information. So two reasons there. But I think the compelling reasons why we should learn from events is because we do have a legal and an ethical responsibility to deliver safe, secure events with a high level of service. And we tend to follow concepts of operations that reflect international doctrine, whether it's FIFA for the World Cup or the Olympics, etc. And all of those talk about the need to have an integrated approach that looks at spatial and temporal aspects of planning. And the founding of that is understanding the context of your event. And one of the ways where we explore the context of our event is to understand the event in detail, but to look at previous events and then apply that learning into our planning process. So I think, sadly, we're always going to be learning from, if you like, case studies. But actually, it's a relatively a quick fix just by following doctrine and guidance and adopting in a process that follows a whole life cycle of event from planning to delivery.
Thank you very much. Chris, I'm aware that you recently gave a presentation, I think, talking about a very recent event and perhaps some of the disasters that came from it. What can we learn from that? And what are the problems from us learning about something like that, or from something like that, I should say?
I think there are a number of challenges, and Peter's just touched on a few of them there. We don't treat time, space, movement, and perception with any reality. We tend to look at what has worked in the past. And events are idiosyncratic. They have their own boundaries, they have their own ideas, they have their own way. Take musical genre, for instance. Every artist that you deal with has to have a different way of dealing with them, because just the genre of music and the way that artist behaves at times change the way you look at the event. The other thing you've got to remember as well is, if you take Hillsborough, people have very short memories. Secondly, some have died within the interim, so they no longer are here. Thirdly, many people no longer go. And what happens is new people coming in have not been coached or have not learned about the activities that have happened early on. And I think the second thing, which Pete brought up again, is this cutting of corners, because we often have poor training. Spokespeople are often not fully behind the learning. And what this does is it makes us continually make the same mistakes, because many people think they'll have gone away by now. But the reason that we have had those mistakes and those issues, the challenges and the disasters, is because these things are elements which should be taken out of the process. But because of the cost of putting some of these things in place, often that doesn't happen. And the other thing that people tend to forget is near misses are a fraction away from a disaster. And we need to continue to log those near misses and actually sit down afterwards when we have post-mortem of an event and think, just how close were we to having something happen at our event? And it's really important that people understand that the event doesn't finish till you've actually reviewed what you've done and taken those things that you reviewed and put them into the next event that's taking place. Because without that, we have no learning process to go through, unfortunately.
Gosh, I'm aware that you said, and you both said, in fact, the importance of recording and the importance of looking at events as they've happened. Do people do that? Is there a sharing, I wonder, of that knowledge? Or is it something that you have to learn through your own experience? I'm happy to throw that question really up to Pete and to Chris and maybe to all four of you. But do we all look at, is there a sort of, I don't know, an appendium of mistakes that you can look at? Or
I think there's case studies you can pick on as a rich source. I think, do we? Yes, we do. Everyone on this panel knows each other. We're friends, we're colleagues, we work together, and we spend a lot of time discussing issues and cases and learning. I think, do most people? I would like to think that most people are aware of a need to consider learning and case studies and share networks. Could our network be better? Yes, of course they could. Could we share better internationally? Yes, of course we could. So I think it's an area that just requires constant focus and a positive mindset as part of your planning for an event, whichever function or role you are delivering. Learning from mistakes and starting from the debrief of a previous incident, of a previous operational plan, should always be the start to help you understand the context of what you're planning for.
That's really interesting. So the debriefing session is hugely important and something that presumably you've all been involved in and continue to be involved in. And maybe that's one of the skills that needs to be learned by some of the others that hopefully want to move into this profession. Chris has said that there is a brain drain, and with that brain drain, there is certainly a need for more people. With that, thinking about really another question, which is how do we stop our focus then on the next big challenge of one event and actually make sure that we balance all the risks and hazards in play? So I wonder if I could maybe pass that on to Tim in the first instance.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I think this starts with people not understanding each other. And by that means is they're in silos. And if you say the next big challenge, that is as we come back from COVID, hopefully, that people do come back out of their silos, because sort of the things we've been talking about in the last few points is the theme of being able to meet each other. And again, a big challenge is like this, a video call, which is fine if you know the person you're talking to and that you've had a history of good relationships with somebody and you understand where they're coming from. So I suppose when you look at the next big challenge is trying to get all those who are planning events together. And all of us have been on countless Zooms, and it's very difficult to particularly with the local authorities who've been stretched everywhere, to get the person who had normally been leading an event team to talk on the same Zoom call as yourselves. It's usually a deputy. So I think the next big challenge will always be a focus. The issue is understanding who thinks what a big challenge is a big challenge. And it's got to be, for me, an understanding of the fact that public authorities use command, coordination, and communication as a sort of tenet, and that feeds everything how they make their decision making. But the coordination bit also and the communication bit are the difficult bits to get round. And really, that's the only way you can identify all the hazards and the risks and come up with a solution. So I think for me, this is getting people together in a room rather than on TV, if you like. But maybe we've got that challenge for pursuing because of the things Pete was saying about money, finances, resources, travel, people's, the planners' risk appetite as much as anything else to get together. So it's a bit nebulous. It doesn't focus on one thing. It focuses on the understanding between people planning and completing and at the end reviewing and taking note of those reviews.
So in a sense, working as you all do in that area, that very important area, it is about understanding people, both in terms of working as a team to make it happen, but also in understanding the people that you're working for, as well as the people that are perhaps at risk too. So it's about communication. That is good, and teamwork, which is affected by technology, perhaps. I wonder, just see, if I pass that to Chris as well, because I'd be quite interested to see what he thinks regards the importance of balance, risks and hazards, and also communication.
Yeah, something came up in the first question, which kind of addressed this. And that was the problem we've got is history does repeat itself. We have thousands and thousands of risks that need balancing. I mean, if you take what we've done is there are major issues that have come up over the last 4 decades. The first one was crowd challenges. All of the information, all of the pressure, everything went on crowd challenges. People forgot about everything around it. Then we had counterterrorism. And again, lots of resources, lots of things going straight onto this. It's like a knee-jerk reaction. Then cybersecurity, with the problem with where you can close a whole event down through cyber. And then we had COVID. So we've been pretty badly hit by, these large, giant elements that have come up. But we've forgotten about things like rape at events, electrical problems, weather, drugs. These are all things that are there, still risks, still challenges, still hazards to people. They're all there underneath, bubbling away. And what we tend to do is we concentrate our efforts on one thing, and we put a lot of money into it, and then we get out of balance. Once we've got out of balance, we're open to lots of things going wrong. Because if we get out of balance, it just takes one of those tiny things that I've spoken about to start to become bigger and then become the giant risk. And then we shift all of our emphasis onto that. What we've got to be is be more steady, more balanced, and just take all of these risks in our stride as we go forward. Okay, some are bigger than the other, and we can put stuff into that. But we mustn't forget about all those things that are there that are trying to support the whole infrastructure of what we do and make these events work in the way that they should.
So in many ways, COVID has been an abstraction from, it's obviously taken us away from focusing on the fact that it's not COVID itself that there's a problem. There's lots of other things that we need to think about.
It has, but the problem with that is what COVID should have done, it should have given everybody who runs an event the time to relook at what they're doing, to look at movement, to look at space, look at time, look at all of these things and people's perceptions and think, have we actually done this the right way? And I know quite a lot of people have, but many people have just gone back and done the same things. So have we learned? Nah.
No. Okay. So people are still in the operations mindset and not necessarily thinking about all the other things that go to understanding. Pete, what do you think? I mean, what do you feel has been the problem in terms of people not focusing just on the immediate challenge rather than the other issues?
I think it's failing to really recognise we've got some really good tried and tested processes. And I would hope that most people have a process for risk management. One that we tend to use is ISO 31000, but many other models are available. But through that, you need to understand the context of your event to identify and analyse what those threats and hazards are, and then use risk management to deploy a proportionate and scalable response. So you're not just focusing on one area. I think unique to COVID, there's now an element where there's perhaps 2 phases. We've been involved in some international research over the last 6 months or so, and there's some fantastic stuff from, for example, the World Health Organization, where you can look at an event risk assessment for COVID. And that's a great first step to look at. First of all, should your event be licensed? Can you get the permission to go ahead? But what is really important, man, is the second phase is incorporating the COVID management into your all threats and hazards approach, and having a holistic plan through space and time, as Chris mentioned, and also getting all the functions and personnel of your C4 platform, as Tim was mentioning there. But if you've got a process that you follow that's logical and sequential and consistent, that will help you to manage all of your threats and hazards in a consistent risk assessment process. And clearly there'll be an issue regarding resources, there'll be an issue regarding cost. And the key thing is the flexible, scalable approach. We're not going to dwell in today or go into the forthcoming protect duty or Martin's law, but clearly there's going to be a requirement for organisers and planners to look at all of their threats and hazards, to develop plans accordingly, to communicate and test and review them. But if you stick to established processes and bring COVID into that process, rather than treating COVID in a silo, you'll be far more effective in delivering a safe event.
Fantastic. So, I mean, that was really what I was thinking about going on to, was saying, how do you think about it for an organizer depending on the type of event it is? So you both said the importance to think about context, the importance to maybe use systems, but to use those within the context that you have, and the contexts are many and varied. Pascal, I wonder if you'd like to talk about that a little bit, about, you know, obviously the risks, but how they might be different, for example, in the environment, urban environment as opposed to rural environment, for example.
Well, let's talk frankly. After each disaster, we say never again, and then we forget. So we always see that after a disaster, there is a focusing event. One of the main academic experts in this field is Thomas Birkeland, and he stressed on this concept of focusing event that enhance the prevention and risk mitigation strategy after a disaster. And after a few time, the awareness goes down because it's and we forget about the risk. We forget because it's very hard to keep the awareness of the risk at the top level everywhere and at any time. So the risk management process is a never-ending process. Every day new risks are revealed or their level is increasing in likelihood or impact. So I would say, moreover, if you look at the long history, a large period of time, witnesses of a period of time focusing on one particular risk are maybe not in the game anymore. So that's one of the explanations why we used to forget. So some challenges are to pass on, to transmit the knowledges and the know-how, dealing practically with the risk. And more, if we are looking at the situation, most of the time knowledge is available but not spread. We know from the risk, but it's kept on just a small circle of experts. So organizing discussions and panel like today teach people from the industry, facilitate the sharing of thoughts and experiences is key. That's the goal when we are setting up courses for professionals, like the master we will be running together, right? And when it's spread, it's becoming a kind of routine. We do like risk assessment or show-stop procedure if you look at the Travis Scott disaster. So actually, a procedure will only tell you from which point you will have to improvise. That's a reality. That's a real world. So we have to train the staff. We have to face the real experience of what it means to make a decision in such situation. So yeah, I think we have a lot of lessons learned. But to be honest, just consider that it's a normal way for human being to forget one part of the risk and the knowledge about the risk. So our role is to keep it alive and to make it available for all the people in the sector.
So in a sense, the what ifs, we should all be thinking about the what ifs rather than the presumption that, well, that hasn't happened for a long time, so therefore it's not going to happen. So yeah, that's good. We do accept. We find it very easy to forget things. So being an expert, an expert more particularly in crowd design and crowd management, we have to think about a number of other factors, obviously thinking about people, but we also have to think about, for example, transport, presumably. Along with transport, we have to think about the setting of the stage. So I wonder if we could find out a little bit more about the external things that we often don't think about. Because remember, a lot of people watching this really know perhaps either very little or indeed nothing about how you go about designing space. So I wonder, is it important? I don't know who to talk to, but I'll start with Chris, and Chris might then direct it thereafter. But do you think, let's think about a music event or a festival. We've got traffic coming in. We have to think about liaison, and you've all talked about the importance of teamwork. How do we go about addressing linkage with the police and with external services, given that they maybe have different processes? Chris, I wonder if you could help me with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to talk this through at a football match, because if you take a large stadium and you think about how people are going to get there are many, many overlays. There's a car parking and car transport overlay for vehicles. There's a coach overlay. There is also a train overlay. And if it's in London, you've got the tube overlay as well. Now, all of these have got to be linked together so that you can see when and where your audience are going to arrive. One of the biggest difficulties is that people forget about arrival and departure phases because they see ingress, circulation, stasis, and egress as the main phases of an event. But actually, the most important two are probably how you get there and how you get people away from there.
Just to interrupt, ingress and egress, maybe not everyone knows.
In and out.
Yes, thank you for that.
Sorry. So if you take, let's take the trains and the tubes. So the cameras linked to all the tube stations that are pushing tubes towards Wembley, for instance, all of the places that are linked through cameras pushing trains towards it are constantly being viewed in nerve centers and other places, so that if anything stops, it changes the pulsing of the crowd from where you are at the station to the event that you're going to. So, for instance, if 6 or 7 trains are late at any one time, or one of your tube lines is down, then if that tube line's down, the pressure then comes on the other tube stations to take that element of extra crowd on board. Similarly, if you're looking at something like a train line, well, when a train comes in, you know how many people are going to be on that train because you know the capacity of the train. Then you've got to pulse those people from the train station to the football ground. And the problem with that is if a lot of people arrive at one time, then you've got to use holdback within the station or around the station area until there is room enough for those people to move up, or you create a problem later on. And of course, linked to that are the police, British Transport Police, and all of these other areas, because they'll also have intelligence that's coming in from football supporters associations, from all sorts of things, from infiltration of the supporters, so they know exactly where the hotspots are. Now, if a hotspot changes, you need to know what transport locations and allocations is going to be, so that you can make sure that you have the amount of reserves and the amount of human resource to actually deal with that. So I'll leave that there and pass it on, because I could go on for 2 or 3 hours talking about this, because it's one of the most interesting parts of an event.
I wonder if I could then should pass that on to Tim. Would you like to talk about that before passing on to Pete?
Yeah, it's different from a city situation like London, for example, has got a very large number of people in an infrastructure planning, and the transport includes walking, cycling, buses, underground, overground, and those sort of processes to get access to those people are quite good. In that they know that it's in their interest, particularly on the transport bit, to understand how many people are coming over what sort of time, and then how many people are going to want to go home all at the same time, potentially. So when you go to a rural situation, or where an event has never been put on a piece of land, whether it's in a city or not, those relationships are not so well developed. And it's probably not obvious who you should talk to. So again, it's where I come from here, is that it's finding the people to talk to before you get too far into event planning, particularly from the promoter's point of view. Their focus is inevitably on money and resources within their event boundary, and really need to be persuaded that, as we were talking, sofa to sofa or home to home is their customer journey, and that's what's going to give them repeat business. So getting them involved in transport detail is persuading them that they need their own transport person to talk to the transport people. Many terms nobody outside that conversation will understand. Customer demand management, all these sorts of things that come into it that give an indication of how many trains and how many people you can get back, or how many buses and how many taxis you can get into a space. So that on the large events, where there hasn't been an event on a piece of land, so not a stadium or a traditional festival site, that's where the challenge comes, to talk the right language again, and then to understand what resources each side need.
So communications, understanding, language, some sort of insight, I suppose. So all of you will have insight into what other people are thinking and doing. But it is challenging, I'm guessing. Pete, I wonder if you have similar knowledge and any other observations.
Yeah, just to pick on the points of the colleagues there, I think it's the concept of operations, which I know may be a police or a public sector term, but really the layers, both in terms of time and space, are so important, whether it's a COVID-19 environment or for general safety, security and service. Now, just applying this to a major international tournament, let's take Qatar for next year, the Football World Cup. Across there, the approach is governed by international doctrine that's set by FIFA and tournament guidelines. The approach then focuses on both the host country, first of all. How does a host country manage crowds? How do you then move between the host country and your host cities? But then when we get to the host city, this is a bit that most people can equate to. In your host city, transport's being mentioned, crowd has been mentioned, background demands. But then it comes from a host city to what people recognize as the last mile concept of operations, or Zone X, or grey space. It's understanding the tournament or event demand for your event. It's understanding the background and community demand, and that is sometimes missed out. And then it's working that through the layers of operation, from the transport node into your outer layers of security, your middle security, access to the event itself, both in times and space. If you follow a layered, systematic, structured approach, the keywords for me are interoperability between the event organizer and blue light services, to recognize that we do that in a systematic manner across the layers of operation through the event flow, and focus on the spectator journey. You'll have a coordinated approach, which is really important, as Tim mentioned.
Fantastic, a great introduction to basically what was the word you, interoperational, let's say inter-knowledgeable, knowing from different areas of operations. You talked about layers, both yourself and Chris talked lots about layering, and I like the idea from the planning perspective is layering things on top, and that comes from architecture as well. I guess the idea that and city planning, of course, as well, thinking as well about Pascal, the idea of looking above as well as thinking about the psychology of it all. And I think you also talked about thinking about the spectators, and the spectators are often not always as understandable as we'd like them to be. So let's think about spectators.
Can I just jump in there quickly, Martin?
Yes,
sorry.
Of course.
Yeah, when I talk about spectators, I think it's not them not understanding. If they don't understand what's going on, that's a communications failure in planning. It's more about recognizing that the whole reason people put events on is for the spectator. So if you take a football or a music event, everything we do should recognize there's a person who's looking forward to a social event at a crowded space. And that's why we stress the fact that the spectator experience has to be viewed alongside the safety elements and security. And you should always think, why are we doing what we're doing? We're doing it to host a football, a music event, a cultural event, and that has to be factored in too.
This is a slightly. I'm also noticing some questions are coming in as well. So this is from a student who's doing an MSc here at Edinburgh Napier University, and asking about your operations. How do you get that kind of experience in event operations and management? And I'm going to ask this question on behalf of her as well, as how does that help, I suppose, when we're thinking about the operations of safety, when we're thinking about crowd design, etc. Do you think that insight is important? And how would you go about getting that insight? So I'll pass that straight to Chris, who can then pass it around.
It's absolutely essential to get as much insight as you possibly can working with events. If you were lucky enough to live in Denmark, then Roskilde Festival has 30,000 volunteers, from paramedics through to doctors, through to every single kind of area that's in there. And people go in and they work there for the whole of the summer, and they go back every year to work there and give their time up. And also there's people working on other elements in crowd management and also visitor management as well. And they're people who work in the front of stage barrier area, they're people who work all around the site. And those are the kind of people we now see coming through onto some of our courses. We see people coming through at some of the conferences we go to. So people, what it's doing is it's putting your hand up and getting yourself noticed. Many people often ask me, how do you get into the industry? Well, do what we all did. Go there, be there, make sure you're noticed. Do anything to get in those events, because once you're in, then people start to trust you. Then you start to work a bit more, and then people call you up and say, would you like to come and work for us at this event, etc. So it's very important. I mean, Pascal, how about you? I mean, you're the security director of a big festival in Switzerland. How does that work for you?
Very good question. Actually, all of the discussion reminds me some thoughts I could have with my team. We used to consider the experience of the attendees as a switch from an individual responsibility to an organizer's responsibility, meaning on one side we have spectators and they only have to comply to the rules decided by the organizers. And I think it's partly tricky, because if you look at the continuity of the experience of the attendee, it's a combination of self-oriented behavior and the way people can adapt their behavior depending on the information available. And when talking about spectators, I think spectators has to be actors. We need to allow them to become actors of the process. Of the process of securing, of the process of providing a safe environment. And using volunteers is a way to reduce this distance between the rules and the decision to comply and the adaptation of behaviors. Because volunteers are just like the same, like the attendees. They look like, they maybe have a past experience as an attendee. So they understand the needs and the expectations of the spectators, and they can facilitate this compliance from the attendees. So maybe we have to switch on our way of thinking and stop blaming the attendees, for example, but trying to engage our audiences in the way to a safe experience for everybody.
Fantastic, thank you. I can say, and as probably everyone can say, that one of the things was having a volunteer experience in events is certainly important, and everything about improving your knowledge is important. Obviously, that's a bit of a drop back for a drop in, I should say, for our MSc, but also just the experience. So offering the capacity to do other things is great for event organizers as well. So if you had that experience, then do use it and do offer it to people as well. You have an MSc, so we have a question here just come in. For Pete and team, for Pete, everybody, how successful has law enforcement been in incorporating public health, COVID, the next big thing, into overall risk assessment procedures, or is it still a standalone element? So is that an issue that we have to think about this now? You did sort of answer that, Pete, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more.
Oh, yes, and thank you for joining, John. John and I work together on a current project, so I know John very well, and it's a great question. And I think law enforcement specifically, so the police community internationally, has had a major impact from COVID-19, both in terms of normal policing services, so preventing crime, responding to the community, but for this, I guess, for major international events. Now, during the COVID process, we've seen, first of all, events cancelled around the world. Then we've seen a return to events with a reduced capacity, and then we've returned to events with full capacity. And the challenge for law enforcement has been, it was a potentially it was a foreseen incident, a global pandemic, but the impact of COVID-19 has never been experienced before. So the law enforcement community has been working hard to make sure that we are interoperable and we integrate with private sector and event managers. And I think one of the things that law enforcement has learned from our research, certainly through the work that we've been doing through Interpol, is it reinforces the message to have a consolidated process for risk management that follows the life cycle of an event, that links into event management, private sector, the host city, etc. And everyone works together and doesn't work together in silo. There have been huge challenges for law enforcement. We've seen, if you've watched the news over the weekend, you can go to your national news or your international news. There's been major impact that's been related to law enforcement. Look at the Netherlands and Austria and Germany over the weekend, managing significant protest. The police service has always been well skilled in managing large protest events, but managing protests with a COVID element has been slightly different. So much learning. One of the key learning that we've come to bear is the need to share information internationally and to make sure that we do focus on working together with organisers in a systematic approach. But nice to see you back, John. Look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go into a final stage here, a relaxed stage. I've got my cup of tea, so everyone can feel that they're relaxed too. But to think about our MSc, really, I would like to talk about our MSc. You can see in front of you some of the tutors that are on this program and that make this program particularly strong and important. So I've had a couple of messages in from prospective students actually asking how they could go about this. But let me tell you a little bit about the program first. So the program is an MSc, and it's called Crowd Space Design, Management and Risk Analysis. It is basically looking at new practices in crowd dynamics and managing crowds. It's a one-year program, and it's different from most programs in the sense it's blended, but the provision of it is very much based on the knowledge, the science, the activity of current people working in that industry who you've heard of from today. So there are a number of modules, but they are 5 modules, in fact, particular modules that are specific to the subject of crowds, changing crowd space, psychological engineering for crowd space, organizational culture, and management of crowded space. Also thinking about different ways of looking at spatial problems in crowded environments. So lots of knowledge particular to crowds. And why it's different is because it's block taught as well. So we're trying to make it available to everybody, and we're very aware that people often don't have the flexibility to be full-time in the sense having to negotiate a week after week after week program. So this program is split into those modules, interdisciplinary approach to spatial problems in crowded environments, starting in March. Before that, the changing crowded space in January, but condensed into 3 days, which are face-to-face, and then the rest is actually online, which we feel is most particular and most important for this dynamic industry, and obviously dynamic people that are doing lots and lots of activity in this area as well. The panel members have all had lots of experience in events. And I wonder if they could just tell me, and I'll start with Chris, why you think this program is so important.
I think the importance of this program is it combines academic and practitioner learning together, because in many masters you tend to have a very, very focused delivery of just academic elements. But how can you teach somebody something unless you teach them how to use it, or you ask them to tell you how to use elements? For example, we'll be developing new processes, we'll be developing new models, and then putting those into practice and getting people to take these away. But this isn't the tutors that do this, it's the people on the course, because we're very much facilitators. We facilitate knowledge, and this is important. We use something called a learning in the round philosophy. So people can be a participant in the room, they can be an expert in the room, or they can be a facilitator. So we move people between these areas. So some people at one stage will be facilitating elements that they've got from their own knowledge and their own information. Some people will become participants then, and then other people will be experts in those areas. So we get that knowledge and we meld it together to make this happen. Now, that's really important because there aren't many courses where this is done. 25 years ago, we started working with this process, and it took a long time to get it to move into how we wanted it to do. But it kind of really brings home how important learning is, because if we don't learn, and the thing is, we as tutors or facilitators will learn as much from the students as they learn from us. And so we're constantly learning as well, which is the important part of the process.
Thank you very much indeed. So just to reiterate, that the program starts in January. So it's the MSc Crowded Space Design Management and Risk Analysis. It is very much a unique program in the sense that it's led by industry experts, focusing, as we've just heard from Chris, on both scientific elements, academic elements, and practices, new and existing practices in managing crowds. And indeed, the focus should really be on the new ones as well. So I'm going to speak again and ask some of my panel, or some of the panel, what they feel is the reason that they're very happy being involved in this, and why do they feel that we need an MSc in this subject now. So shall I pass that to Tim, and then maybe to Pascal? So Tim.
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to be involved. It's an opportunity for me to share a few years of experience, especially on major events, but also to listen to. I'm quite excited to listen to the people on our course and their experiences. As like Chris said, learning all the time, and it's a way of me handing back to the industry.
Fantastic, thank you. And maybe Pascal? Pascal, can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Firstly, I would like to say I fully agree with Chris' statement on the learning in a round process. Being also an associate researcher, former sociologist, I hold a PhD 9 years ago now, and I'm into practice 100%. So I'm used to trying to do this transfer from the academic to the practical, but also the way around. And I think there is no hierarchy between knowledges, and we all learn from each other when crossing different kind of knowledges from academic to practice. And I can see now there is more and more people coming from the ground, doing studies, doing education courses. And I think this master MSc will be the most fantastic opportunity to recognize the practical knowledge as very valuable from an academic point of view. And maybe last point, I do represent today the international dimension of the project, coming from Switzerland and being also very involved in different networks at the international level, just like the YES Group, European Event Safety Group. And I'm always very impressed by the way we can learn from different contexts. We are so isolated. We are so oriented at the national level, and when you cross the experiences, when you cross thoughts and experience from different countries, you learned a lot. So that's why I think this master at the international level with international tutors and international students will be very interesting to follow.
I realize that time has marched on. This is a very international program. It's based on international insights as well as UK insight, world insights. All these people have experiences around the world, and that's very important. I've had a couple of questions coming up saying, when can we apply? A couple of people that are currently doing both an undergraduate and postgraduate. And to say that someone's just asked me for an email address. Well, I can show that as well. So there's a PG admissions tab about to go up, I believe, hopefully. So PG admissions at napier.ac.uk, which will take you to the courses and to the MSc Crowded Space Design Management Risk Analysis postgraduate full-time. And when you can apply is now. We're going to, it starts in January, but we're still accepting people, but we do ask that you apply as soon as possible. And if you are in Europe, just to say as an attraction that there is a grant potentially to ensure that you don't have to pay any more than you would as a UK student as well, as long as you fulfill a certain criteria. So we do, all of us, believe that this is an incredibly exciting and incredibly important program now, and that now's the time, but now is the great opportunity. As Chris has said, that there is a brain drain. We need more people in this space, and we need people studying this program. So if you want to do well, both in the COVID, post-COVID, and whatever happens in the future, then this is a wonderful program for you. I think I should close now because it is now past. We were supposed to close at past. So can I just ask the panel just to any last words that they wish to say, which can be as simple as a wave. Chris.
Yeah, looking forward to people coming on the course, because we can't wait to get together and teach these people, because it's just such a great opportunity, and we've loved creating the program.
And Pete, any other?
No, I won't delay time. Just fantastic opportunity for all of us to work together. Looking forward to it.
So get involved with the world experts in an MSc, which is designed for you, designed for people that want to prosper in this very exciting environment. It's for men, women, it's for everybody that has an interest in crowds, people, different types of events, different types of activities. There's always going to be crowds, there's always going to be people. Industry has realized how important events are, and of course the arts and culture know how important events are. So we'd like to see you. I'm Martin Robertson. You can contact me on m.robertson2@napier.ac, or you can go straight to pgadmissions@napier.ac.uk. We very much look forward to seeing you, and thank you for enjoying and giving questions towards this event. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.